I think it's safe to say that Crossfire Legion has had a bumpy start to early access. At least bumpier than fans of veteran real-time strategy developer Blackbird Interactive, current home of all-time great RTS franchise Homeworld, would expect. As of recording, Crossfire Legion has received 279 reviews on Steam, of which 115 are negative. I read them all, and then plotted their criticisms across the following categories to visualize what exactly Crossfire Legion did to piss people off. As we dive into the data, I'll give my opinion on whether or not the most common critiques are warranted within the confines of Crossfire Legion, and then comment on whether said criticism should trouble the Homeworld 3 hype train. So, all that said, let's dive in. As you can see, a majority of Crossfire Legion critiques concern the game's value. Simply, is it time and money well spent? No, said a significant number of players, because Crossfire Legion forces you to unlock units with a grindy in-game currency, an apparently good idea in different sorts of games but not in an RTS, as it makes any new player vastly underpowered. Turns out, Blackbird agrees. Effective June 29th, Crossfire Legion will no longer have an in-game store or soft currency of any kind, because these features led players to wonder about the introduction of gameplay-affecting microtransactions in the future, and pay-to-win in general. Prior to reading this dev blog, I actually recorded a long segment dissecting Crossfire Legion's soft currency store and its repercussions on the new player experience. As said segment is no longer relevant, all I'll say on this is kudos to Blackbird for listening to the community and eliminating the game's biggest criticism. Sadly, there are several more. The second thing I'll be looking at is Crossfire Legion's second most common complaint. The unit collision in Pathfinding is just bad. According to players, units in this game will just bounce back and forth, trying to decide whether to try and push through their friends or just walk around them. While problematic for Crossfire Legion, as a Homeworld fanatic myself, I'm immediately unconcerned by this critique, and I'll explain why in a minute. Next, Crossfire Legion's third most frequent criticism is perhaps its most troubling. The game's three factions, Blacklist, Global Risk, and New Horizon, are not balanced properly, yet somehow feel the same. Indeed, keeping factions balanced and unique is probably the biggest hurdle for any RTS, especially one with esports ambitions, so I'll be sure to test each faction in a variety of situations during my playthrough. Last and least, as far as consistent criticism goes, does any of this even matter? Because is anyone even playing this game? We'll end our review with a quick dive into the player-based statistics of Crossfire Legion and answer whether or not this game is already dead. These critiques in mind, it's time to put Crossfire Legion under the Meg of the microscope.
We're starting on the barracks.
Pathfinding and unit collision, fancy terms for asking whether the units are Mark Sanchez clones. To be sure, pathfinding is a critical factor in any fast-paced RTS, and I have to acknowledge that Crossfire Legion's is average at best. It's really not as bad as some of the reviews would suggest, and it's noticeably better than some RTS offerings to come out in recent years. This in mind, I'm confident the veterans at BBI will be able to fine-tune an already negligible problem by the time early access ends. Now, remember when I said that this concern didn't concern me much in the context of Homeworld? That's because unit collision and pathfinding is much easier to code in space. Why? Two words. Well, one letter and a hyphen and then another word. Z-axis. In Homeworld, units have the ability to go above or below whatever is in their way via the Z-axis. So it's hard to imagine a universe in which pathfinding plagues Homeworld 3. That said, it's possible the new Homeworld's much-hyped new feature, megaliths, will force some units into tighter spaces like tunnels and make unit collision a little more noticeable. Still, I trust in Blackbird's A-team to deliver on this front. Next, Crossfire Legion's biggest blunder and the one that seems the least fixable. This game fails to nail the delicate balance between balance and novelty. Consider this, it's relatively easy to balance a game with two factions that share identical units. And yes, I am alluding to the original Homeworld here, as the Kushan and Titan enjoyed near complete ship overlap. However, in my opinion, Blackbird founder Rob Cunningham of then Relic Entertainment so nailed the respective Titan and Kushan design aesthetics that he and his team gave each race the illusion of gameplay novelty, to the point that players didn't really care one way or another. Now add a few unique ships to each fleet, a la Homeworld 2, and you've suddenly got a game that's much harder to balance, but presents more novel gameplay. Indeed, Hagara's bigger selection of slow-moving frigates compared to the Vaegar's fast, missile-heavy strike craft promoted more defensive and aggressive playstyles respectively. And now consider the miracle that is StarCraft, which still stands as the genre's balance versus novelty gold standard. That three so stylistically and mechanically distinct races could all share near equal win percentages over the game's lifespan lifespan is a playtesting miracle to which other developers should aspire, Blackbird included, if this quote from Rock Paper Shotgun is any indication. Where StarCraft's 3 factions vary wildly in appearance and playstyle, legions are all slightly futuristic, morally gray private armies that deploy a random assortment of tanks, technicals, helicopters, and drones onto the battlefield. I ended up referring to them as the red one, the yellow one, and the gray one because color is about all that distinguishes them at a glance. Sadly, I must agree, except in the context of faction commanders, where, ironically, color does not distinguish them. All the characters in this game are really just slight permutations of an attractive, English-speaking startup CEO in his or her late 30s. So, I'm more concerned by this lack of faction design novelty than I am Crossfire Legion's early access balance issues, as that really just boils down to stat recalculations, right? As all the Homeworld 3 gameplay footage I've seen suggests Blackbird will be sticking with the series' classic blue guy's good, red guy's bad, two-race paradigm, I doubt we'll see the same balance issues that have troubled Crossfire Legion to date. Before we wrap up, it's worth touching on 2 final critiques I see fired at Crossfire. First, playing anything but the campaign, even AI skirmishes, requires an always online connection, which doubly sucks because second, nobody is online. With an all-time concurrent player peak average of, and this is true, 217, it's hard to argue that Crossfire Legion isn't already dead. That said, I've been consistently getting weeknight matches in a minute or less, so I wouldn't let this number discourage you from giving Crossfire a go, assuming you're still interested. And you should be. Look, I know this video has been all bad all the time, but in my opinion there's actually a very solid RTS experience lurking just beneath Crossfire Legion's flaws, waiting for Blackbird to polish up. Given the developer track record here, I do think that Crossfire Legion's bumpy start to early access will gradually smooth, culminating in a product well worth your time at full release. As for Homeworld 3, let's be honest, there's nothing I could have said here that would have convinced you or me to hop off the hype train. And while Crossfire Legion's launch probably marks a low point for Blackbird, I have a feeling Rob Cunningham and the boys will learn from their mistakes just in time to deliver a Game of the Year contender in 2023. Until then, this is Scope, and thanks for watching.